Amidst the suffocating shadows of ancient tombs, a scream tore through the night, a sound so terrifying that it chilled the blood of anyone who dared approach. This was not just a man. It was a battlefield where a human soul had been swallowed by a legion of 6,000 demons, breaking iron chains as if they were threads and cutting his own flesh in desperate agony. But on the other side of the raging sea, a greater power was awakening, calming violent storms and marching straight into the heart of darkness to confront an enemy that no army could defeat. Today, you will witness the moment hell itself trembled before a single whisper from the Son of God. Before we unveil this ultimate clash between the Prince of Peace and the armies of the Abyss, join our mission to spread the truth by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, liking this video, and sharing it to keep the flame of prophecy alive. Brace yourself, for the darkness is about to scream one last time before it is silenced forever by the light. Amidst the suffocating shadows of ancient tombs, a scream tore through the night, a sound so terrifying that it chilled the blood of anyone who dared approach. For this was not merely a man lost in madness, but a living battlefield where a human soul had been swallowed by a legion of darkness, breaking iron chains as if they were threads and cutting his own flesh in desperate agony. Yet on the other side of the raging sea, a greater power was awakening to confront this very darkness. And today you will witness the moment hell itself trembled before a single whisper from the Son of God. So before we unveil this ultimate clash between the Prince of Peace and the armies of the Abyss, join our mission to spread the truth by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, liking this video and sharing it to keep the flame of prophecy alive, because the darkness is about to scream one last time before it is silenced forever by the light. The wind howled furiously over the dark waters of the Sea of Galilee, as if creation itself sensed the monumental spiritual collision that was about to happen, and the sky was choked with thick, bruising clouds, while violent waves crashed against the wooden boat where Jesus and his disciples were sailing, tossing the vessel like a fragile leaf in a hurricane. Peter held the mast tightly, his knuckles white with tension, trying to keep his balance as cold water flooded the deck and the roar of the tempest drowned out their thoughts, leading him to shout in desperation, "Master, the wind is against us." Yet Jesus remained silent, his serene eyes gazing at the distant horizon with a calmness that defied the chaos around them. For there was something beyond the storm, something invisible to the human eye, but felt in every heavy breath of the air. And John looked at him, and even without words understood that this journey was not just a crossing of the sea, but a crossing of purpose, a divine appointment that no storm could prevent. Suddenly, as if commanded by an unseen hand, the wind stopped, the waves calmed down instantly, and the sea became a dark mirror reflecting the grey sky, leaving a deep, supernatural silence to take over the boat that was more unsettling than the noise of the wind, causing James to look around in confusion and whisper, "What was that?" To which Jesus simply answered in a low, steady voice, "We have arrived." The boat docked on the desolate shore of the Gerasene region, where wet sand crunched underfoot, and the air carried a heavy, metallic smell of iron and salt, a scent that hinted at decay and sorrow. Ahead of them, arid mountains rose like ancient walls, marked by dark caves and crumbling tombs where the living did not venture, and a crow flew by, letting out a sharp, mournful cry that echoed through the empty valleys, adding to the palpable sense of dread that hung over the land. Andrew approached Jesus cautiously, his voice lowered as he said, "Sir, I heard there is a man here that no one can control. They say he lives among the dead." But Jesus walked forward in silence, and each of his steps seemed to resonate with a hidden power, as if the ground itself acknowledged the authority of its creator. The disciples followed him, hesitant and watchful, as the wind began to blow cold again, carrying a strange murmur that sounded almost like distant, tormented voices. And suddenly a scream echoed among the stones, a sound so desperate and deep that it made the disciples step back instinctively. Among the shadows of the tombs, a thin, wild figure emerged, covered in open wounds and dirt, with broken chains dangling from his wrists as symbols of his failed attempts at captivity, his dishevelled hair fluttering in the wind and his eyes burning like embers of absolute madness. He fell to his knees before Jesus, his body trembling violently and his eyes possessed by something clearly inhuman, shouting in a voice that was not his own, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Have you come to torment us before the time?" The disciples looked at each other, astonished by the demon's recognition of their master, and Peter took a protective step forward. But Jesus raised his hand gently, signaling him to stop, for this was a battle not of swords, but of spirits. The possessed person was writhing on the ground, screaming and crying in a mixture of rage and fear, begging, "I swear to God, don't torment me." But Jesus leaned slightly forward and calmly said, with an authority that made the very air tremble around them, "Leave this man, unclean spirit." The possessed one's body arched in an unnatural contortion, and a roar came from his throat so intense that it made the birds fly from the trees in panic, while the veins in his neck bulged and his skin seemed to throb as if something inside him was desperately trying to escape the presence of holiness. "Who are you?" Jesus asked with a steady, piercing gaze, and the man slowly raised his head. But when he spoke, his voice was no longer one, but many, deep, high-pitched, distorted, a cacophony of lost souls, answering, "My name is Legion, because we are many." The disciples stepped back in horror, realizing the magnitude of the evil before them, and John fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands, while James murmured, trembling, "Sir, what is this?" Yet Jesus remained still, his eyes fixed on that man with unwavering focus, his voice calm like someone speaking to the wind, declaring, "No legion can withstand the power of God." The possessed person began to cry, and for a moment a real human tear escaped from his eyes, revealing the man who still existed, trapped and terrified behind the turmoil, pleading softly, "No, don't send me to the abyss." A thunderclap echoed in the distance as the clouds closed in, and a lightning bolt lit up the scene with stark white light, revealing a large herd of pigs grazing on the slopes that began to grunt, restless, as if sensing the shifting spiritual tides. Jesus remained silent, listening to the wind pick up as shadows moved over the stones, and a deep cold swept through the valley, making the air vibrate with a hidden presence that the disciples could feel in their bones. Something greater than flesh, greater than reason was taking place. The possessed man raised his face, and the voices inside him began to shout in unison, forming a chorus of hate and despair. "Let us go into the pigs, let us enter them." Jesus took a deep breath, his expression one of profound compassion rather than fear, and as the soft light of the sky began to open between the clouds, touching his face with a golden glow, he commanded, "Go, but you will no longer dwell in the man that God created in his image." The scream that followed was deafening, causing the stones to vibrate and the sound to echo throughout the valley, while the wind suddenly blew harder, kicking up dust and dry leaves, forcing the disciples to cover their ears, unable to bear the cries of darkness being torn away from a human soul. And then, abruptly, the man's heavy breathing stopped, and he fell motionless onto the cold ground as the shadows dissipated like smoke in the wind. The distant sea was agitated, and the pigs started to run crazily towards the cliff, driven by the madness that had been cast out, plunging into the waters below. Jesus watched quietly as the first ray of sun broke through the clouds and lit up the fallen man's face, which was now serene, free, and at peace. The dust was still hanging in the air, and the distant sound of the waves mingled with the echoes of the screams that had finally ceased. The freed man remained motionless, breathing with difficulty as the sun began to break through the clouds, casting a faint, hopeful glow over the valley. Peter was the first to approach with slow steps and a face of disbelief, asking, "Master, What did we just see? But Jesus did not respond immediately, his eyes remaining fixed on the horizon where the pigs had disappeared into the abyss, for the smell of salt and mud rose from the sea, mixed with the spiritual weight that still lingered in the air. "Darkness trembles before the light," Jesus said softly. "What was hidden is now exposed." The freedman started to move, slowly placing his hands on the ground and trying to get up, the broken chains still hanging from his wrists as a reminder of his past, his body weak but his soul breathing for the first time in years. He looked around, confused, like someone waking up from a long, terrible nightmare, whispering, where am I?" Jesus approached and helped him get up, and the touch of the Master made the man tremble, not with fear, but with an overwhelming relief, for his eyes, once shrouded in darkness, now reflected the gentle morning light. "You are free," Jesus assured him. "The burden you carried is no longer yours." The man put his hands on his face and started to cry, the tears running down his old wounds, washing away the dust and blood, sobbing, I heard voices. They were screaming inside me. There was no silence or rest. But now everything is quiet." The disciples watched quietly, their hearts heavy with awe, and John, with teary eyes, moved a bit closer and asked, "Lord, who can endure such darkness?" Jesus looked at the trembling disciple and replied with a calmness that seemed to anchor the very earth beneath them. "The one who brings the light does not fear the darkness." And as this profound truth settled over the group, the wind began to blow softly, no longer a gale of fury but a gentle caress that made the valley seem to breathe again, signaling that nature itself was celebrating the restoration of order. The birds, previously silenced by the roar of the demonic presence, started singing again, and the sound of leaves rustling in the ancient olive trees announced the end of a long and terrible oppression. Overwhelmed by the sudden silence of his own mind, the freed man fell to his knees before Jesus, his heart bursting with a gratitude that words could barely contain, stammering, "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. I was living among the dead, a hollow shell of agony, and now I feel life blooming inside me like a seed finding water." To which Jesus responded by placing his hand gently on the man's head, a touch that conveyed absolute acceptance, saying, "God has not forgotten you, for even in the deepest, most suffocating darkness, his voice was calling your name." But the peace of the moment was soon interrupted by distant cries, as the shepherds, who had witnessed the herd of pigs plunging into the sea, ran desperately toward the city, their panic spreading like wildfire until, shortly after, dozens of locals gathered on the hillsides, watching that strange group from a safe distance, with eyes wide in suspicion. The disciples looked at each other uneasily, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, and James whispered, "They seem afraid," to which Jesus noted that fear is always the first reaction of the human heart to a power it does not understand. The freed man, now lucid but vulnerable, looked at the approaching crowd and saw faces he recognized, men who used to chase him with stones, women who used to hide their children from him, and he lowered his head in deep shame, whispering, "They will hate me, Lord. They will look at me and think I am still the same monster." But Jesus knelt in front of him so their eyes were at the exact same level, bridging the gap between the divine and the broken, and said, "He who has been touched by grace does not need to prove anything to men. Just live, and your life will be the testimony that speaks for you." The words went deep, dissolving the heavy weight of guilt that had bowed the man's shoulders for years, and Peter, observing this tender interaction, whispered to John, "I have never seen so much authority and so much mercy woven together. Neither the winds, nor the waves, nor the demons can resist him." The crowd finally gathered courage to approach, murmurs of discontent spreading among the men, until a woman pointed an accusing finger at Jesus and shouted, "He destroyed our animals. He made the spirits leave that madman and cast them into the pigs. What kind of power is this that costs us our livelihood?" The disciples tensed, expecting a conflict, but Jesus remained still as a statue of peace, while the freed man stood by his side, trying to defend his Savior, saying, "He set me free. I was dead inside, a prisoner of my own mind, but now I am free." Yet the crowd fell silent only for a moment, torn between amazement at the man's sanity and distrust of the stranger's power. Jesus took a few steps forward, his voice carrying over the wind. "The human heart fears what it doesn't understand, but God's love is greater than fear." And as he spoke, the wind blew, lifting the master's robes and scattering golden dust around him, while the sun shone brighter, turning the sea into a glistening sheet of silver. For a moment the scene seemed suspended in time, a divine pause before the inevitable separation, and the freed man fell again at the feet of Jesus, pleading, "Let me go with you, sir. I want to follow you to the ends of the earth." But Jesus shook his head gently and gave him a harder mission. "It is not necessary. Stay here, go back to your home and tell everything that God has done for you, for the light you received needs to shine in this dark place." The man nodded, moved to his core, and as tears of faith ran down his face, he realized that every step away from that beach felt like letting go of the past and embracing a new beginning. The disciples turned to the master, and Peter asked, "Shall we go, sir?" To which Jesus looked at the calm sea and replied, "Yes, we accomplished what we came to do." The boat was waiting for them, gently swaying in the tide, and the group walked in silence to the beach, the sound of the waves blending with the distant murmur of the crowd. But as they boarded, John looked back and saw the freed man, now surrounded by some locals, speaking with fervor and gesticulating, the shine of faith illuminating his face like a beacon. The boat began to move away slowly, cutting through the calm waters as the sun's reflection shimmered on the surface, and Jesus remained at the bow, looking at the horizon with serene eyes that seemed to see beyond the sea, beyond the lands and beyond time itself, knowing that a single soul was set free and all of hell had trembled because of it. As the boat disappeared into the luminous vastness, the coast of the Gerasenes became just a thin line on the horizon, leaving behind the silent promise that divine love always triumphs over darkness. And if you want to continue witnessing these powerful moments of biblical history and uncover the prophecies that shape our world, make sure you are subscribed to Guardians of the Covenant so you never miss a revelation. The return crossing through Galilee began under an almost sacred silence, the boat slicing through the calm waters while the gentle sound of the waves accompanied the disciples' thoughts, each one lost in the memory of the miracle they had just witnessed. Peter, leaning over the side, watched the golden reflection of the sky and murmured, "Master, I have never seen anything like it. That man was pure torment, a vessel of chaos, and now he seems like a child." While Jesus, seated at the bow, kept his expression calm despite the weight in the air, as if he felt the echo of the invisible battle he had just fought. "There are wars that man does not see, Peter," Jesus said, "but heaven and hell know every soul for which they fight." John, sitting nearby, asked quietly, "Master, when that man said, 'We are many,' what did he mean?" And Jesus explained that the evil spirit doesn't walk alone. It multiplies in voices, thoughts, and fears, creating a fortress of despair, but a single word from God is enough to silence them all. The wind gently swayed the sails, and the dawn tinged the sea with golden light as the boat sailed smoothly, as if creation itself were resting after the confrontation. "Lord, why did you leave him among those people?" Andrew asked, struggling with the logic of it. "They rejected you. They asked you to leave." But Jesus did not take his eyes off the horizon as he replied, "Because sometimes the light must stay where there is more darkness." The disciples felt the heavy truth of those words settle in their hearts, and the wind brought the distant sound of seagulls and a faint spiritual murmur that seemed to come from nowhere. "Master, do you hear this?" asked James, to which Jesus replied, "Evil retreats, but it never sleeps. Today's battle was won, but many more will come." Meanwhile, back in the lands of the Decapolis, the freedman walked through the streets, his clean clothes revealing old scars, but his eyes shining with a peace he had never known, speaking passionately to everyone he met, saying, "I was dead, trapped in voices and chains, but the one who comes from God has freed me." Some listened in silence, others turned away in fear of the unexplainable, but the news spread like wildfire until whole villages started repeating his testimony, and the sea returned to the wind the echo of a now sacred name: Jesus of Nazareth. On the boat, Peter was still thinking and asked, "Master, when you ordered them to leave, it seemed as if the very sky was trembling." And Jesus taught them that the power of the Most High is not in the shout, but in the authority, for the voice that created the world is the same that commands, and evil has no choice but to obey. Andrew, looking up, asked the question that haunts many: why does the enemy choose some and not others? And Jesus revealed that he looks for vulnerable hearts where there is fear, trying to reign where faith is expelled. The sun now shone high, its reflection on the sea dazzling the eyes, and the boat seemed to float between two worlds, the earthly and the spiritual, carrying the light of the world toward the next horizon. John took a deep breath, feeling the lingering vibration of invisible forces colliding in the air, and whispered, "The man we set free was a battlefield, a vessel where every terror and scream was held to keep him enslaved, yet God's mercy does not retreat in the face of despair." The sea was calm now, a liquid mirror broken only by jumping fish, and Peter broke the silence one last time to ask, "Sir, will he understand what happened to him?" To which Jesus replied, "He will understand the essential, that love is stronger than the legions." As the boat moved slowly, leaving a white trail over the golden sea, the disciples felt they were sailing not just over waters, but over an eternal mystery, while Jesus kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, reminding them that the kingdom is near, but requires spiritual eyes to be seen. The boat disappeared into the luminous vastness, but the echo of his presence remained over the Decapolis, where the man who once roamed among tombs now walked the streets with steady steps, causing children to hide behind their mothers in memory of his past screams. He stopped before the village well, staring at a reflection that no longer bore the twisted mask of madness, but the calm face of a son restored. And when an elderly woman trembled and asked, "Are you the man from the graves?" he gently replied, "I was, but I am not any more, for I was saved by the power of him whom hell cannot resist." His words echoed like fire in the square, silencing the mockers and igniting belief in the few, and when a fearful father asked, "What if he comes back?" the freedman smiled with certainty, saying, "He doesn't need to come back. Where there is faith, he stays." Driven by the Master's voice within, he went from village to village, healing the wounded and consoling troubled hearts, becoming a living testimony that hope can be born where once there was only fear. On the other side of the sea, resting by a campfire, Peter watched the dancing flames and remarked, "Master, that man will never be forgotten." And John, looking up at the starry sky, asked the question that lingered in all their hearts. "But why just one, Lord?" Jesus looked at them, the firelight shining on his face, and answered, "Because the love of the Father measures infinity in a single soul." Reverence filled the air as they understood that every liberation is a victory against the abyss, and as Jesus walked to the shore to pray, the waves whispered in response to his presence, carrying the promise that the name of Jesus would echo like a song that time could not silence. If this story of liberation touched your heart and you want to explore more biblical mysteries and prophecies, please subscribe to Guardians of the Covenant, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to know that no darkness is too deep for the light to reach.